A family stands at an airline gate, tickets in hand, ready for a well-deserved vacation. They are polite, successful, and happen to be black. When they request a paid upgrade to the empty seats in first class, they are met with a cold, dismissive refusal, dripping with veiled contempt. The gate agent's smile is a mask for her prejudice, a prejudice that will follow them onto the plane, transforming their journey into a crucible of public humiliation. But what the crew of Global Air Transit Flight 76 doesn't know is that this isn't just any family. They are the Hendersons, and they hold a secret that won't just get them an apology. It will shatter careers and reshape the very airline that sought to belittle them. The air in JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with the controlled chaos of travel. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the low chatter of 1,000 different journeys beginning or ending. For the Henderson family, it was the start of a long overdue escape. Roman Henderson, a man whose calm demeanor was the bedrock of a tech empire he'd built from the ground up, adjusted the strap of his simple leather duffel bag. He was dressed for the 10-hour flight to Zurich in comfortable, unassuming travel clothes, a dark grey hoodie, tailored joggers, and a pair of minimalist sneakers that cost more than the gate agent's monthly rent, a fact entirely lost on anyone who wasn't a connoisseur of quiet luxury. Beside him, his wife, Dr. Narina Henderson, a retired corporate litigator with a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, was checking her phone. She possessed a natural elegance that no designer logo could bestow, her hair styled in intricate braids that cascaded over the shoulder of her cashmere travel wrap. Their 16-year-old daughter, Jordan, tapped away on her own device, a lanky teenager swimming in an oversized university sweatshirt, her expression one of mild, curated boredom. They were flying premium economy on Global Air Transit, a legacy carrier with a storied history and, more recently, a troubled balance sheet. Roman had booked the tickets himself weeks ago. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle of not being needlessly extravagant. But today, standing before the boarding gate, he saw the sea of red on the departure board, indicating a delay. A 10-hour flight was about to become an 11-and-a-half-hour ordeal. "Let's see if we can make this a little more comfortable," Roman said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. He approached the Gati priority counter, his family falling in step behind him. The first-class cabin, he knew from checking the app, was only half full. There were at least 6 empty pod-style seats. The gate agent, a woman in her late 40s with her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, glanced up. Her name tag read Karen Miller. Her smile was a thin, painted-on line that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes? How can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Good afternoon," Roman began warmly. "We're the Hendersons, in seats 22A, B, and C. I see you have a number of open seats in first class. We'd like to pay for an upgrade for all 3 of us." Karen Miller's eyes flickered over the family. She took in Roman's hoodie, Narina's travel wrap, Jordan's collegiate sweatshirt. Her internal calculus, honed by years of snap judgments, delivered its verdict. Her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing sweetness. "The first-class cabin is fully booked. We have no available seats." She didn't even look at her computer. Roman's own smile remained, but it lost its warmth. That's odd. The Gati app is showing 6 available for purchase right now. Seats 2D, 3A, 3D. He held up his phone to show her. Karen glanced at the screen for less than a second before waving a dismissive hand. "The app isn't always accurate, sir. There are last-minute bookings, operational holds. It's very complicated." "I see," Narina interjected, her voice smooth but with a new, steely edge. Could you perhaps double-check your system? We are more than happy to pay the fare difference. With the delay, the extra space would be appreciated. Karen's gaze shifted to Nerina. It was a look that Nerina, who had faced down opposing counsel in some of the country's most formidable courtrooms, recognized instantly. It was the look of someone dismissing her, not based on her words, but on who she was. As I said, Karen repeated, her voice losing its faux sweetness and becoming flat and final. There are no seats. Premium economy is a very comfortable cabin. I'm sure you'll be just fine there. She turned her attention pointedly back to her monitor, a clear signal that the conversation was over. The man behind them in line, a portly gentleman in a golf shirt named Gregory Preston, huffed impatiently. Some people just can't take no for an answer, he muttered, loud enough for the Hendersons to hear. Roman felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a feeling he'd been taming since he was a young man. It was the anger that came from being underestimated, from being judged by a hostile world's narrow lens. He looked at his wife, saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes before she masked it with stoic grace. He looked at his daughter, who was now watching the exchange with a keen, disappointed intelligence, her phone held loosely at her side. He could have pushed. He could have demanded to see a supervisor. He could have made a scene that would have validated every ugly stereotype Karen Miller held in her head. Instead, he made a different calculation. He took a deep, steadying breath. "All right," he said, his voice even. "Thank you for your time." He turned and led his family away from the counter, finding a quiet spot by the large terminal windows. The silence between them was heavy. "She didn't even check, Dad," Jordan said, her voice low and angry. "She just decided." "I know," Roman said, staring out at the massive Gatti jet being serviced on the tarmac. Its logo, a stylized golden eagle, seemed to mock him. "This is global air transit's culture, Roman," Nerina said softly, her hand finding his. "We've read the reports. Customer complaints are through the roof. The stock is in the gutter. This is the rot, right here at the gate." Roman squeezed her hand. His gaze was distant, his mind already shifting from the sting of the insult to the cold, hard logic of a boardroom. He had spent the last 6 months leading a consortium of investors, Henderson Equity Partners, in a quiet, methodical acquisition of a controlling interest in GAT's parent company. The deal had been finalized just last week, the public announcement and board transition scheduled for Monday morning in Zurich. He was, for all intents and purposes, the airline's new de facto owner. This flight was supposed to be a quiet trip to attend the formal announcement, a family vacation tacked on at the end. Now, it was something else, entirely. It was a field test, and his new company was failing spectacularly. "Yes," he said, his eyes still fixed on the plane. "It is. Let's see how deep the rot goes." The call to board came 45 minutes later. As they shuffled down the jet bridge, the Hendersons had to walk through the very first-class cabin they had been told was full. The 6 empty seats Roman had seen on the app were still there, gleaming under the soft cabin lighting. Pristine leather pods, each with a neatly folded blanket, a plush pillow, and a bottle of sparkling water waiting. As they passed, a lead flight attendant with sharp features and a name tag that read Brenda Dixon offered them a smile that was as brittle as spun sugar. "Welcome aboard," she chirped, her eyes barely registering them before flicking to the passenger behind. The moment they crossed the curtain into premium economy, the atmosphere changed. The lighting was harsher, the aisles narrower, the seats visibly less generous. They found their row and stowed their bags. Jordan, with the practiced subtlety of her generation, propped her phone against the window, angled just so, and hit record. She wasn't capturing the clouds. She was documenting the quiet, simmering injustice of their experience. As the remaining passengers boarded, Roman watched the first-class cabin. A young couple, white, dressed in jeans and t-shirts, were warmly greeted by Brenda and shown to 2 of the empty seats. A minute later, he heard the man say, "We just asked at the gate, figured why not try our luck?" And Brenda's cheerful reply, "It's always worth asking. So glad we could accommodate you. Can I get you a pre-departure glass of champagne?" Nerina's jaw tightened. She looked at Roman, her expression a mixture of fury and resignation. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not yet. The plane finally pushed back from the gate. As they taxied toward the runway, Gregory Preston, the man who had scoffed at them in line, settled into his seat across the aisle. He had, to no one's surprise, secured one of the bulkhead seats with extra legroom. He was already complaining loudly to his seatmate about the delay. The flight took off, a powerful roar lifting them into the darkening sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, the cabin service began. The difference was stark. Forward of the curtain, the sounds were of clinking glassware, polite murmurs, and the attentive whispers of the flight crew. Brenda Dixon orchestrated the first-class service with practiced ease, laughing with passengers, offering wine pairings, and ensuring every need was met before it was even expressed. When a different, younger flight attendant reached their row, the service was efficient, but joyless. The meals were served on plastic trays, the choices limited. About 2 hours into the flight, Jordan was watching a movie on her tablet, a pair of high-end headphones over her ears. A sliver of light from her screen bled into the darkened cabin. It was barely noticeable, certainly no brighter than the seat-back screens around them. But it was enough. Brenda Dixon emerged from behind the first-class curtain, her face set in a mask of stern disapproval. She marched directly to their row, her eyes zeroed in on Jordan. "I'm going to need you to turn that off," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the drone of the engines. She didn't address Jordan directly, but spoke to Roman, as if his teenage daughter were a misbehaving toddler. Jordan pulled off her headphones, startled. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your device. The light is disturbing the other passengers," Brenda said, gesturing vaguely toward the front of the cabin. Roman looked around. No one seemed disturbed. The man in front of them was sound asleep. Gregory Preston was engrossed in his own movie. "Her screen is no brighter than any of the others," Nerina stated, her tone calm but firm. "And she's wearing headphones." Brenda's attention snapped to Nerina. "Our premier passengers in the forward cabins expect a certain ambiance. We have a responsibility to minimize all disturbances." The use of premier passengers was deliberate, a verbal line drawn in the sand. The Hendersons, clearly, were not among them. "I'm sure they do," Roman said, his voice dangerously quiet. "But we are also paying customers, and your airline's policy allows for the use of personal electronic devices. Is there a specific rule my daughter is breaking?" Brenda was taken aback by his direct, articulate challenge. Her composure faltered for a second, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. "Sir, I'm the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. If I determine something is a disturbance, it is a disturbance. I'm not going to argue about it." At that moment, Gregory Preston paused his movie and leaned into the aisle. "You heard her. Some of us are trying to rest. Turn the thing off. Show some respect." The confrontation was no longer private. Several nearby passengers turned to watch the drama unfold. The Hendersons were now exhibits in a public trial, cast as the disruptive passengers. Jordan, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes, quickly turned off her tablet, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "It's fine, Mum, Dad. It's fine." Brenda gave a tight, triumphant smile. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said, before turning on her heel and disappearing back behind the curtain, her mission accomplished. Nerina reached over and took her daughter's hand. Her knuckles were white. She looked at Roman, her eyes blazing. All the years of enduring small slights, of having to be twice as good to get half as much, of swallowing pride to keep the peace. It was all there, boiling to the surface. Roman met her gaze. The time for observation was over. The rot was deeper than he imagined. It wasn't just poor training, it was a sickness in the culture, and Brenda Dixon was a potent symptom. He gave his wife's hand a reassuring squeeze. His expression was unreadable, but behind his eyes, the gears of power were beginning to turn. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a chairman, and this was his company, and the reckoning was coming. The rest of the flight was thick with a palpable tension. The Hendersons sat in a bubble of charged silence, acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances from their fellow passengers. They were marked. Jordan kept her tablet off, staring blankly at the seat back in front of her. Nerina read a book, but her eyes never seemed to move from the same page. Roman remained preternaturally still, his gaze fixed on the flight map, watching the tiny digital airplane inch its way across the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic. He wasn't just watching their progress, he was strategizing. Every microaggression, from Karen Miller's dismissive wave at the gate to Brenda Dixon's public shaming of his daughter, was a data point. He was building a case, not as a lawyer would, but as a CEO would, identifying a systemic failure that was costing his new company more than just customer loyalty. It was costing it its soul. An hour before their initial descent into Zurich, Nerina needed to use the restroom. The one in the premium economy section was occupied. Seeing the vacant sign on the lavatory just inside the first-class cabin was lit, she walked the few steps forward and gently parted the curtain. Brenda materialized as if from thin air, physically blocking her path. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "I'd like to use the lavatory, please. The one in our cabin is occupied," Nerina said politely. "This lavatory is for first-class passengers only," Brenda stated flatly. "It's an emergency," Nerina said, her patience wearing paper-thin. "And I'm quite sure that FAA regulations don't segregate lavatories by cabin class in a medical or urgent situation." This was a direct challenge to Brenda's authority, and the flight attendant's face hardened into a mask of indignation. "Are you a doctor? Are you declaring a medical emergency?" "I have a PhD, but no, not a medical one," Nerina replied, refusing to be baited. "I am a passenger on this aircraft who needs to use the restroom. That should be sufficient." Gregory Preston, who had been returning from the same lavatory, stepped past Nerina, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he scoffed. "The entitlement." Brenda saw her opening. "Ma'am, you are creating a disturbance and harassing other passengers. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat immediately." "This is absurd," Nerina said, her voice rising slightly despite her best efforts to control it. "I am not harassing anyone. I simply need to use a vacant restroom." Roman was on his feet in an instant. He moved to his wife's side, his presence alone a formidable shield. "What seems to be the problem here, Ms. Dixon?" he asked, his tone low and even, yet carrying an unmistakable weight of command. "The problem, sir, is that your wife is refusing to follow crew instructions," Brenda snapped, feeling emboldened by what she perceived as a united front with the other first-class passengers. "This is a security issue now. I have warned you people repeatedly." The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, a toxic pollutant. It was the final straw. "That's enough," Roman said. The words were not shouted, but they cut through the cabin noise like a razor. "Your behavior, from the moment we arrived at the gate, has been unprofessional and discriminatory. You will allow my wife to use the restroom, and then you will leave us alone for the remainder of this flight." Brenda's eyes widened, shocked at being so directly and authoritatively confronted. Her face flushed with anger. "How dare you! I am in charge of this cabin's safety. You are being aggressive. I'm calling the captain." She turned and marched toward the cockpit, her back ramrod straight. A hush fell over the surrounding seats. This was no longer a simple disagreement. It was escalating into a major incident. A few minutes later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Robert Morrison emerged. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with silvering hair and a demeanor that radiated an unshakable and perhaps unearned sense of self-importance. He didn't come to mediate. He came to adjudicate. Brenda stood beside him, a smug, vindicated look on her face. Captain Morrison strode directly to where the Hendersons stood in the aisle. He didn't make eye contact with Nerina. He addressed Roman exclusively, man to man, as he saw it. "Sir, I'm Captain Morrison. I've been informed that you and your family have been repeatedly disruptive and have failed to follow the instructions of my lead flight attendant." His voice was a deep, booming baritone, accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Captain," Roman began, his own voice a stark contrast in its controlled calm, "that is a gross mischaracterization of events. My wife was denied access to a lavatory. My daughter was admonished for using a tablet, and your gate agent in New York lied to us about the availability of paid upgrades, which were then given to other passengers. The only disruption has been from your crew's inexplicable hostility toward my family." The captain's face darkened. He was not used to being contradicted. "My crew is one of the best in the fleet. Brenda Dixon has been flying for 25 years. I will not have her integrity, or my own, questioned. You were told this lavatory is for first-class passengers. That is the policy on my aircraft. End of discussion." "So, to be clear, Captain," Nerina said, stepping forward, her lawyerly instincts taking over, "you are officially refusing a passenger access to a vacant lavatory." Captain Morrison finally looked at her, his gaze dismissive. "Ma'am, you will return to your seat now. All of you. This is your final warning. If I have to speak to you again before we land, I will have you all restrained and met by law enforcement at the gate in Zurich. Am I understood?" The threat was explicit. The humiliation was absolute. They were standing in the aisle, surrounded by gawking strangers, being threatened with arrest by the captain of the airplane. Jordan had her phone in her hand again, held low, but the lens was pointing straight at the captain. Her face was pale, but her eyes were defiant. Roman looked at the captain, then at Brenda, whose expression was one of pure triumph. He saw the impassive faces of the other first-class passengers. He looked at his wife's proud, wounded expression and his daughter's quiet defiance. He nodded slowly. "You are understood perfectly, Captain." He gently guided his wife and daughter back to their seats. They sat down. The curtain was drawn with a decisive swish. The show was over. As Captain Morrison returned to the cockpit, he felt a surge of satisfaction. He had maintained order. He had backed his crew. He had put the troublemakers in their place. It never occurred to him, not for a single second, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The final hour of the flight was a descent in more ways than one. The plane descended through the dark, pre-dawn sky toward the Alps, while the Hendersons descended into a state of quiet, simmering resolve. The public confrontation had stripped away any remaining ambiguity. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, systemic pattern of disrespect, enforced from the ground agent all the way up to the captain's chair. Roman Henderson was a man who understood systems. He'd built an empire by identifying inefficiencies and breaking down flawed structures to rebuild them stronger, smarter, and more equitable. As he sat there, the drone of the engines a steady backdrop to his thoughts, he was no longer thinking like a passenger. He was thinking like an owner. He was performing a silent, brutal audit of his new company's most public-facing asset, its people. Karen Miller, gate agent, failure in customer service, potential violation of fair practice policies, dishonesty, root cause, implicit bias, lack of oversight. Brenda Dixon, lead flight attendant, egregious abuse of authority, discriminatory application of policy, creation of a hostile environment. Root cause, entrenched culture of classism and prejudice, poor leadership. Captain Robert Morrison, gross negligence of passenger welfare, unprofessional conduct, issuing threats without proper investigation, failure to de-escalate. Root cause, arrogance, dereliction of ultimate responsibility, embodiment of a toxic us versus them crew mentality. Gregory Preston, passenger, a secondary factor but a revealing one. His open support for the crew's behavior indicated a customer base that felt empowered to participate in the discrimination. The culture was so pervasive, it invited an audience. Narina, sitting beside him, was engaged in her own mental calculus. She was replaying every word, every look, every gesture. As a litigator, she had dismantled witnesses far more formidable than Brenda Dixon or Robert Morrison. She recognized their tactics, stonewalling, misdirection, and intimidation. She also knew their fatal flaw. They believed they had all the power. They believed the Hendersons were just three nameless, powerless individuals who would be easily cowed and forgotten once they deplaned. They had no idea they were creating a perfect, self-contained record of their own misconduct. Jordan, for her part, was meticulously cataloguing the evidence. She discreetly scrolled through the videos on her phone. She had the initial confrontation with Brenda over the tablet. She had the audio of Gregory Preston's snide remarks. And she had the crown jewel, a clear, stable video of Captain Morrison, his face puffed with authority, threatening her family with arrest. It was damning. It was irrefutable. And it was all time-stamped. As the plane's landing gear lowered with a heavy thud, a sense of finality settled over the cabin. The seatbelt sign chimed. Below them, the lights of Zurich glimmered like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was a beautiful sight, but the Hendersons could feel none of its charm. The landing was smooth. As the plane taxied to the gate, Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, its usual cheerful, post-flight tone now sounding jarringly hypocritical. On behalf of Global Air Transit and this entire flight crew, I'd like to welcome you to Zurich. We hope you enjoyed your flight with us today. A bitter, silent laugh passed between Roman and Narina. Once the plane docked and the engines spooled down, the familiar rush of passengers grabbing their bags began. But then, another announcement from the cockpit stopped everyone in their tracks. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your patience. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until we have cleared a security matter. The deplaning process will be momentarily delayed. A murmur of confusion and annoyance rippled through the cabin. Gregory Preston huffed loudly. For God's sake, what now? Brenda Dixon walked slowly down the aisle, a faint, malevolent smirk on her lips. She stopped at row 22. The captain has requested that the Henderson family remain on board after all other passengers have deplaned, she announced, her voice carrying for all to hear. Please wait here. You will be escorted off the aircraft. The final humiliation. They were being held to be handed over to the authorities like common criminals. Passengers craned their necks, their faces a mixture of pity, curiosity, and morbid satisfaction. They were the flight's dramatic finale. Jordan felt a hot flush of shame. But when she looked at her father, she saw no fear. His face was a mask of absolute calm. It wasn't the calmness of surrender. It was the calmness of a chess grandmaster who sees the checkmate 10 moves ahead. "Of course," Roman said to Brenda, his voice polite. "We'll wait." The other passengers were finally allowed to leave. They filed past, some avoiding eye contact, others staring openly. Gregory Preston shot them a triumphant glare as he squeezed by. "Guess you should have followed the rules," he sneered under his breath. Soon the plane was empty, save for the Hendersons, Brenda, another flight attendant who looked deeply uncomfortable, and the 2 pilots who remained sequestered in the cockpit. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the auxiliary power unit. Brenda stood near the front, arms crossed, waiting for the escort to arrive. She was savoring her victory. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Narina looked at Roman, an unspoken question in her eyes. He gave a subtle nod, pulling out his phone. He typed a short, simple text message to a single contact. "We've landed. Gate E54. Proceed." The recipient was a man named Lars Weber, the Zurich-based head of European operations for GATT, the man who was supposed to be meeting Roman at a private lounge. A few moments later, the jet bridge door opened, but it wasn't the Swiss police that appeared. Instead, a group of 4 men in impeccably tailored suits stepped onto the aircraft. They moved with an air of brisk corporate authority. The man in the lead was in his 60s, with a worried, florid face. Brenda's smug expression immediately evaporated, replaced by confusion. She recognized him instantly. It was Gerald Finney, the Chief Executive Officer of Global Air Transit. Gerald Finney's face was a mask of controlled panic. He had been expecting to greet his company's new chairman in the discreet luxury of the VIP arrivals lounge. Instead, he had been summoned by a cryptic text to an aircraft surrounded by whispers of a security incident. His mind was racing through a dozen disastrous scenarios. He spotted the Henderson family sitting calmly in premium economy and walked briskly toward them, his entourage trailing behind. Brenda Dixon, seeing the CEO striding past her without a word of acknowledgement, hurried to intercept him. "Mr. Finney, sir, I'm sorry. You can't be in this area. We've had a security situation with some unruly passengers. The captain has called for local authorities," she explained, trying to assert control. Finney ignored her completely. He came to a stop in the aisle next to Roman's seat. He extended a hand, his expression a mixture of apology and deep concern. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice strained, "my sincerest apologies for this reception. I was expecting you in the lounge. Is everything all right?" Roman remained seated. He didn't take the offered hand. He simply looked up at the CEO, his gaze steady and cool. "No, Gerald, everything is not all right." The cabin, already quiet, seemed to fall into a vacuum of absolute silence. Brenda Dixon's jaw went slack. Her eyes darted from the powerful CEO to the man in the hoodie he had just addressed as Mr. Henderson. The name clicked in her brain, a horrifying, sickening realization dawning. She had seen the name on internal memos about an upcoming leadership transition, but she had never connected it to the family she had spent the last 10 hours tormenting. At that moment, the cockpit door opened and Captain Robert Morrison emerged, a self-satisfied look on his face. He saw the suits and assumed they were high-level airport security or consular officials. "Gentlemen, thank you for the prompt response," he began, his voice booming with authority. "I'm Captain Morrison. These are the 3 individuals I reported. They have been belligerent and non-compliant for the entire flight. I'm prepared to give a full statement to the police." Gerald Finney turned slowly to face the captain, the CEO's face, already pale, had turned a ghostly white. The blood had drained from it. "Captain Morrison," Finney said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Shut your mouth." The captain's bravado vanished, replaced by stunned confusion. "Sir? I don't understand." Finney took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked from the captain's bewildered face to Brenda's horror-struck expression, and then back to the man who now held the fate of his company and his own career in his hands. "Captain," Finney said, gesturing toward Roman, "allow me to introduce you to Mr. Roman Henderson. He is the managing partner of Henderson Equity Partners, the investment group that, as of last week, acquired a 51% controlling stake in this airline. He is your new chairman of the board." The words detonated in the enclosed space of the airplane cabin. Captain Morrison's face crumpled, as if he had been physically struck. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, grey pallor. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Brenda Dixon looked as if she might faint. She reached out a trembling hand, steadying herself against a seatback. The entire flight, every sneer, every condescending word, every abuse of her minor authority flashed before her eyes. The unruly passengers, the security threat, the people she had looked down upon with such disdain were, in fact, the most powerful figures in the entire corporation. She had not been enforcing company policy. She had been digging her own professional grave. Roman Henderson finally stood up. He was no longer just a father in a hoodie. He was an embodiment of power, his quiet stillness now radiating an immense, intimidating gravity. He looked directly at Captain Morrison. "Captain," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "your threat to have my family arrested. Was that standard Gay-T procedure, or a personal innovation?" Morrison stammered, his confident baritone reduced to a pathetic squeak. "Mr. Henderson, sir, there was a misunderstanding. I was acting on the information provided by my crew." "Your crew?" Roman's gaze shifted to Brenda, who flinched as if he had thrown something at her. "The crew member who denied my wife access to a lavatory? Or the one at the gate in New York, who lied about seat availability?" He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "No, Captain. You didn't act on information. You acted on prejudice. You saw a black family in sweatshirts and you made an assumption. You and your crew failed. You failed as service professionals. You failed as representatives of this airline. And you failed, most profoundly, as decent human beings." He then turned to his daughter. "Jordan, please show Mr. Finney the video you took." Jordan, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide, stunned eyes, unlocked her phone. She stepped forward and handed it to the CAO. On the small screen, the scene played out in perfect, damning clarity. Captain Morrison, his face contorted with arrogance, threatening her family. Gerald Finney watched the short clip, his expression growing more grim with every second. He handed the phone back to Jordan as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't need to see any more. He looked at his captain and his lead flight attendant, his eyes filled with a weary, abyssal disappointment. "Both of you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Get your logbooks, your flight credentials. Meet me in Lars Weber's office in 1 hour. Do not talk to anyone." He then looked at the other, younger flight attendant who was hiding near the galley. "You too. I want a statement from everyone." He turned back to the Hendersons. "Mr. Henderson, Dr. Henderson, Miss Henderson, on behalf of an airline I can barely recognize today, I am so profoundly sorry. Words are not enough. Please, allow us to escort you." Roman nodded curtly. "We will be attending the board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., as scheduled, Gerald. But the agenda has changed. This incident is now item number 1. As the Henderson family finally stepped off the plane Escorted by the CEO and his team, they left behind a crew suspended in a state of professional purgatory. Brenda Dixon sank into a nearby seat, her face in her hands. Captain Robert Morrison stood frozen, staring at the empty seats where his new bosses had sat, the full, catastrophic weight of his actions finally crashing down upon him. He hadn't just lost an argument, he had lost everything. The next morning, the main boardroom on the top floor of Global Air Transit's Zurich headquarters felt like a courtroom. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the grey, overcast sky visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The mood was equally somber. The existing board members and senior executives, including a shell-shocked Gerald Finney, sat on one side of the table. On the other side sat Roman, Narina, and Jordan Henderson. They were no longer in travel clothes. Roman wore a perfectly tailored dark grey suit. Narina, a sharp, elegant business dress. And even Jordan was dressed in smart, professional attire. They were not here as victims. They were here as the new centre of power. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened and 3 individuals were ushered in. It was Captain Robert Morrison, Brenda Dixon, and the gate agent from JFK, Karen Miller, who had been flown overnight to Zurich. They looked haggard and terrified. They were directed to 3 chairs placed uncomfortably in the center of the room, facing the board. Roman Henderson let the silence stretch for a full minute before he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and carried the cold weight of absolute authority. Good morning. For those of you who I haven't met, I am Roman Henderson. As of today, I am the chairman of this board. We were scheduled to discuss Q4 financial projections and fleet modernization. That discussion is postponed. Instead, we are going to talk about the culture of this company. He gestured toward the 3 employees. These 3 individuals are not solely on trial today. They are symptoms of a disease that has been poisoning global air transit for years. A disease of arrogance, prejudice, and a profound disrespect for the very customers who pay their salaries. He looked at Karen Miller first. Ms. Miller, yesterday at JFK, I asked to pay for 3 upgrades to a half-empty first-class cabin. You told me, without checking your system, that the cabin was full. Why? Karen, her face pale and blotchy, stammered. I thought it was full. The system can be tricky. I made a mistake. Did you? Roman countered, his voice like ice. Or did you look at my family, dressed for a long-haul flight, and decide we didn't belong? Did you decide we weren't your type of first-class passenger? He didn't wait for an answer. We have pulled the transaction logs from your station. 2 minutes after you denied us, you granted a complimentary upgrade to a silver medallion passenger. 10 minutes after that, you sold 2 paid upgrades to the very seats I had asked about. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Karen Miller crumbled, burying her face in her hands. Roman's gaze shifted to Brenda Dixon. Ms. Dixon, you confronted my 16-year-old daughter over the light from her tablet. You denied my wife access to a lavatory. You repeatedly referred to us as you people, and escalated a situation that required simple courtesy into a major confrontation. Your file says you have 25 years of experience. In all those years, did anyone ever teach you that your primary job is passenger safety and comfort, not acting as a gatekeeper for a private club at 35,000 feet? Brenda tried to speak, her voice trembling. I was following policy. The first-class cabin. It's a premium product. It is a section of a public conveyance, for which we were prepared to pay, Narina interjected, speaking for the first time. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the room. The only thing premium about it yesterday was your sense of entitlement. You used company policy as a weapon to humiliate us. Was Gregory Preston, the passenger in 21D who verbally supported your harassment, also part of this premium experience you were protecting? The mention of the other passenger's name and seat number showed a level of meticulous recall that unnerved everyone. Brenda had no answer. Finally, Roman turned to the captain. Captain Morrison, the pilot in command, the final authority on the aircraft. You had the power to de-escalate, to investigate, to lead. Instead, you marched out of your cockpit, ignored our side of the story completely, and threatened a family with arrest. You used the authority vested in you by the FAA and this company to intimidate a child. He paused, then leaned forward slightly. I have a question for you, Captain. In your mind, what was our crime? What offense did we commit that was so grave it warranted the threat of law enforcement? Morrison, his face ashen, looked up, his eyes pleading. Sir, Mr. Henderson, it was a grievous error in judgment. I was tired. It was the end of a long rotation. I backed my crew without asking the right questions. I am deeply, deeply sorry. You are sorry you got caught, Roman stated flatly. You are sorry that the family you chose to bully turned out to be your new boss. You are not sorry for your actions, because your actions were instinctual. They were the product of a culture you have thrived in, a culture where the uniform gives you absolute power and the customer has none. He stood up and walked to the head of the table. Jordan handed him a tablet. This is not just about our experience, Roman announced to the room. In the past 12 hours, my transition team has done a deep dive into Gate's customer service records for the last year. The results are appalling. He projected a series of charts and graphs onto the large screen behind him. Over 2,000 formal complaints citing crew rudeness, a 300% increase in accusations of discriminatory behavior, overwhelmingly from passengers of color. Internal surveys show crew morale is at an all-time low, with the highest marks for job satisfaction coming from senior crew members with the most complaints against them. They feel untouchable. He turned off the screen and faced the board. This airline is rotting from the inside out, and the rot stops today. He looked back at the 3 disgraced employees. Ms. Miller, Ms. Dixon, Captain Morrison, your employment with Global Air Transit is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building. Your final paychecks will be mailed to you. The FAA will be notified of the incident and will receive a full report, including the video evidence, to conduct their own review of your licenses. It was a corporate death sentence, swift, brutal, and absolute. As for you, Gerald, Roman said, turning to the CEO, this happened on your watch. This culture festered under your leadership. We'll be discussing your future this afternoon. The reckoning was not over. It had just begun. The karma for years of institutional neglect and arrogance was hitting Global Air Transit like a tidal wave, and Roman Henderson was directing the tide. The termination of the 3 employees was not the end. It was the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened on Flight 76 became the stuff of corporate legend, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and training sessions. But for Roman Henderson, the incident was not a weapon for instilling fear, but a catalyst for profound, systemic change. His afternoon meeting with Gerald Finney was not a termination, but a reassignment. Finney was removed as CEO, but Roman, recognizing the man's deep operational knowledge, tasked him with a new, humbling role: to lead a top-to-bottom, dignity and service overhaul of the entire company, reporting directly to Narina Henderson, who took an active role on the board's new oversight committee. The hard karma continued to ripple outwards. Henderson Equity Partners initiated a review of all major corporate accounts. They discovered that Gregory Preston, The condescending passenger was a senior partner at a consulting firm that had a multi-million-dollar travel contract with GATT. Roman personally called the CEO of that firm, explained the situation, and sent him the video of his employees' behavior. The contract was put under immediate review, and Preston faced his own internal repercussions for conduct unbecoming of his company's values. But Roman and Narina knew that firing a few people and scaring a business partner wasn't a solution. The real work was in rebuilding. The first major initiative was the Henderson Promise. It was a complete rewrite of Gate's customer service philosophy. The core principle was simple. Every single passenger, regardless of their ticket class, their appearance, or their background, was to be treated with the same level of respect and dignity. To enforce this, they launched the Above the Clouds program. Anonymous auditors from all walks of life were hired to fly GATT routes and report on their experiences. Crew performance bonuses were no longer tied to on-time departures alone, but directly to customer satisfaction scores and positive audit reports. Next came training. The old, stale, here's the policy manuals were thrown out. In their place, a new, mandatory empathy and implicit bias training program was developed, designed by leading sociologists and psychologists. It was intense, uncomfortable, and non-negotiable for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the board members. Narina herself led the first session for the senior executive team. Jordan, deeply affected by the experience, proposed her own idea to the board: the GATT Foundation Flight Path Initiative. The airline, using a percentage of its profits, would create a multi-million-dollar scholarship and mentorship program for students from underprivileged communities who wanted to pursue careers in aviation as pilots, engineers, mechanics, and flight attendants. Her goal was to change the face of the industry from the ground up, ensuring the next generation of crew and pilots reflected the diversity of the world they served. The board approved it unanimously. 6 months later, Global Air Transit was a different airline. The stock price, which had been in a nosedive, began to climb as positive stories about their new customer-centric approach started to go viral. The Henderson Promise wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a visible reality. Passengers noticed the change in the crew's demeanor. The atmosphere on the planes was lighter, more welcoming. One evening, Roman, Narina, and Jordan were in the GATT flagship lounge at JFK, waiting to board a flight to London. They were flying first class, but this time it was different. The lounge manager approached them, not with the fawning deference one might show a chairman, but with genuine warmth. "Mr. and Dr. Henderson, it's an honor to have you," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. My niece just became the first recipient of the Flight Path Scholarship. She starts her pilot training next month." Narina smiled, a real, radiant smile. "That's wonderful to hear. We're very proud of the program." As they boarded their flight, they were greeted at the door by a young, bright-eyed flight attendant. "Welcome aboard the Henderson flight," she said with a grin, a playful new greeting some of the crews had adopted. As she showed them to their seats, Roman noticed the first-class cabin was completely full, and it was a vibrant, diverse mix of people, a true reflection of the world outside the airplane's aluminum shell. Settling into his seat, Roman looked out the window at the bustling tarmac. His family had been denied an upgrade, but in return, they had upgraded an entire airline. They had faced the venom of prejudice and, instead of succumbing to anger, had used their power to systematically dismantle the culture that produced it. The karma that had struck down a captain, a flight attendant, and a gate agent had not been an act of revenge. It was an act of restoration, clearing the way for something better to grow in its place. The flight had been a reminder of a bitter truth, but the destination had become a testament to a hopeful future, flying at a new and much better altitude. The story of the Henderson family and global air transit is a powerful reminder that true justice isn't just about punishment, it's about rebuilding. It shows how integrity and power, when used correctly, can dismantle systems of prejudice from the inside out. They faced humiliation, not with rage, but with resolve, turning a painful experience into a catalyst for positive, lasting change that would benefit thousands of employees and millions of passengers. Their journey teaches us that the highest form of karma isn't just seeing the guilty fall. It's creating a world where their actions can no longer take root. What would you have done in their situation? Have you ever faced a moment where you were judged unfairly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of poetic justice and incredible transformation moved you, please honor the Hendersons' legacy by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing for more unforgettable tales of karma and consequence.